You know, when we think about studying the universe, we usually picture these giant telescopes, right? Peering into the distant cosmos. But sometimes the biggest secrets are found in the tiniest things, like microscopic particles of stardust that have traveled for millions of miles just to get to us. So let's get into the absolutely incredible challenge of how you even begin to study these tiny messengers from space.
I mean, seriously? How do you do that? It sounds like a riddle, doesn't it? But this was the exact, almost impossible sounding problem that scientists were facing. They had these priceless little samples of cosmic dust, and they needed to know their mass. But how do you weigh something you can barely even see? So here's the deal. NASA has these high-altitude U-2 aircraft that fly way up in the stratosphere, using special collectors to gently snag these tiny particles. And when I say tiny, I mean it. We're talking 5 to 50 micrometers. They are so unbelievably small and fragile that your standard lab equipment, yeah, it's completely useless. You can't just pop these on a scale.
So, what do you do? Well, scientists had to get really, really creative. And they didn't invent some brand new futuristic device. Instead, they adapted a tool that already existed, and they used it in a way no one saw coming.
Meet the quartz fishpole balance. And get this, its origin story is just fascinating. This super sensitive scale wasn't even made for astronomy. It was first developed by biologists to weigh individual living cells. It's just a perfect example of how different fields of science can come together to solve a problem.
The whole process is just a masterclass in patience and precision. First, a scientist using a micromanipulator has to pick up one of these dust particles with a needle that has a single stable hair glue to its tip. Yes, a single hair. Then they have to carefully place that particle on the very end of this tiny quartz fiber. That's the fishbowl. The whole setup then gets covered so that even the slightest draft of air doesn't mess things up. And finally, they look through a microscope to measure the teeny tiny amount that the fiber bends. It's an incredibly delicate hands-on process. But you know what? It works over 95% of the time.
Okay, so they figured out how to get the mass. Problem solved, right? Well, not quite. That was only half the battle. See, to get the density, you also need the volume. And that, well, that turned out to be a whole other can of worms. Just think about it for a second. These particles aren't nice, neat little spheres. They're lumpy, they're porous, they're just irregular. Trying to calculate the volume of something like that by looking at it under a microscope, even from a couple of different angles, is just ridiculously hard and totally prone to huge errors. So, once again, they came up with this brilliant workaround. Instead of trying to map every last little nook and cranny on the particle's surface, they just decided to measure its shadow. By taking pictures of the particle silhouette from 4 different directions, they could build a pretty good 3D model of its overall shape, what they call the minimum convex envelope. It's so much simpler and way more accurate for estimating the volume of these awkward little space nuggets. So, with these 2 ingenious techniques, the fishpole for mass and the shadow method for volume, scientists could finally, for the first time, calculate the density of individual cosmic dust particles. And what they found was genuinely surprising. When they actually crunched the numbers, the results were all over the place. Some particles were exactly what you might expect. Dense little spheres made of aluminum and iron with densities around 4 grams per cubic centimeter. But then there were the others. Particles they nicknamed things like pancake, which had this incredibly low density of 0.4. Another one from a particle that broke up was even lower, at 0.3. And this was the big takeaway. A whole class of these particles, the stony, unaltered ones called chondritic particles, had a density of less than 1 gram per cubic centimeter. Now, to put that into perspective for you, the density of water is 1 gram per cubic centimeter. Anything less than that floats. So what this means is that these tiny particles, after traveling all the way across the solar system, are so porous and so lightweight that they are literally fluffier than water. Now, this is way more than just a cool little science fact. This discovery has some really profound implications for what these tiny specks can tell us about the history of our entire solar system. To get why, we have to talk about something called surface density. It sounds a bit technical, but all it really is a measure of how much mass is packed into a particle silhouette. And that single number is the absolute key to figuring out how much a particle heats up as it screams through our atmosphere. And right here, this is where it all comes together.
The high-density, compact particles, they get super hot as they enter the atmosphere. We're talking over 600 degrees Celsius. That intense heat basically acts like an eraser, wiping out any records of the particles past, like old tracks left by solar flares. But the low-density, fluffy particles, they act more like little parachutes. They slow down gently and they don't overheat, which means their ancient solar flare tracks are preserved. They are, in effect, pristine little time capsules from the early solar system. This research literally created a roadmap for what to do next. The scientists themselves spelled it out in their paper, saying that the best way to find these pristine records of cosmic history is to focus on these smaller, fluffier particles. It's just a perfect example of how one clever measurement can point the way for an entire field of science. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? These tiny, fluffy bits of dust held secrets about the history of our sun, and we could only read them once we figured out how to weigh them with a single strand of hair. So it just leaves you with this big question. What other cosmic secrets are out there, hiding in plain sight, just waiting for the next clever way to be measured?